Hey guys! So today we are going to talk about the birth of legacy, and not any type of legacy. We're going to talk about one of the worst types of legacy, legacy CSS. So let's get into it. Now, yesterday I was just working, normal day, just tapping away at my keyboard, putting zeros and ones into my box, and I get this message from one of my coworkers. And it's a desperate one. I've never seen this man ever be this desperate. He just kind of types out the 3 words: need front-end help. Now it's serious. So I go over to his desk, I sit down and I talk to him. And he explained his conundrum. So he explains that he has this carousel, basically. And there's a bug. And I go, okay, what type of bug is it? Well, you see, and then he pulls up his phone and he shows a web view. And for those, like a web view basically embedded in a third party that we are cooperating with, so a third party client of ours, where the application, like the specific application, is actually shown inside of that web view. And I go, all right, cool, that doesn't look so bad. What's the problem? Well, if I just remove the content here, if I come in as a user who doesn't have a list that kind of flexes out this content, look what happens. And I see what happens. The browser window in the application gets crushed down to like the minimum size, or the default size on this specific device. And I go, well, that's not good. And he goes, no, it's not. And I've been trying desperately to fix this. And I say, all right, let's have a look at it. So we start going through the basically this carousel structure. And the first thing I notice is that we've made, like, what has been done here is the same classic mistake that people make when they create these, or they try to create these reusable components. They try to make it generic, they fail, and now we're stuck in a situation where we kind of have to just deal with it. Anywho, the fundamental problem that we could identify was that, well, we're using Flexbox basically, and the problem here is that when the browser window is actually trying to figure out how high it's going to be within the phone, it actually uses the size of the content. So in other words, I showed him, if we go to a page where you just have like text that fills out the entire content, you will see that the browser will actually understand that this is the size of the content. But remember, when you like switch to landscape mode or you switch around with the phone, that's going to recalculate the dimensions. You have to account for that. And he goes, how do I fix it? And I go, well, and then I show him the fundamental problem, because what's happened is that someone has laid out their entire column, like on the phone. We're using Flexbox and relative values. And I explain the problem here is that you're not actually telling the browser cannot infer how high the content should be based on this. Ideally, and I kind of go through, okay, you should add some padding here, and you should set some, like, for the header and the footer, you should have some type of dimensions here, etc. And we kind of just go through it, right? And then finally he says, oh, that's great, Frederick, but I can't just rewrite this whole thing. Like, I'm trying to figure out how to solve it as is. Like, is there some way I can solve it right now without, refactoring all of this? Because that's a lot of work. And I go, well, yeah, there's one single thing, as I can see it, there's one thing we can try if we don't want to do it the right way, and that is to simply force the height in this scenario, because we can. And he goes, what do you mean we can't? Well, because we know that this application is only used on this specific use case, because we have a separate application, like with assets and so forth, for this specific use case. Since we know that, we can trust that this is going to work, because you don't want to do this on, if somebody uses some other app, like some other device or so forth, or, well, not the device necessarily, but it's a bit risky to enforce it for every single use case. And as I just set the height to the height of the viewport, and then set the minimum height to whatever minimum height you support on this device, this specific device type. And he does, and it works. And then we kind of talk about this. And he says these beautiful, it's like he understood. He understood. He said, yeah, well, this is a little bit of a hassle. I mean, this is because he was kind of sighing and he was saying that I hate CSS, and I go, all right, what's so wrong with it? Well, there's all these rules and all that stuff, and the worst part is that when I'm just trying to fix this, but I can't just fix it because somebody else has already made a bunch of decisions, and now I either have to rewrite everything or I have to just hack it together. And then I just point at him and go, yes. You just touched on the fundamental problem with people working within CSS. The problem is that if a person before you takes decisions on your behalf, you are screwed. For the most part, there's very little you can do to fix CSS. And depending on how naive or how badly the person before you fucks up your CSS, they use what I call destructive CSS. You might find yourself in a situation where you can no longer, the only option for you is to just hack together things on top of what's already there, because the risk of you changing something is either going to be too high, or the work entailed, like in this scenario, as he said, he would have to, because of how the implementation worked, he would have had to rewrite the whole damn component. The whole thing would have had to be rewritten in a correct manner, that is actually using CSS and layouts in the correct manner. And that's just not feasible. And I mean, we kind of talked about it, often it just comes down to inexperience, and this is kind of why I think a big part of web design and front-end development, or whatever you call it, kind of came to pass. Or rather, it's kind of nice, because it's nice when somebody like my coworker here has been primarily focused on the back end for most of his career can kind of just come in and say that, yeah, this is like, it requires a certain level of skill and a certain level of knowledge to actually fix this sort of issue, right? But as we were saying, this is the fundamental problem. It snowballs on you. And I explained to him, like, imagine, like in this scenario, we were lucky that we could actually solve it without having to rewrite something. But there are also situations where you can't do anything. A great example is if somebody sets a rule on, say, a root element, like just say a span or a div or something like that. That's like the worst thing you can possibly do. You say, all right, I want my padding on a, I don't know, span to default to a few pixels, whichever direction. If you set that rule can, when the project starts growing, nobody can really change that, because the odds of you breaking the whole goddamn layout on a page is fairly high. So what now happens is that people naturally, instead of fixing this problem, because it's too high risk, they're simply going to add their own rules on top of it. And then the next person comes and adds rules on top of it. I mean, we already did it. If you were paying attention, all we did was to add to the problem. All we did was to actually add our own legacy CSS on top of this problem instead of fixing it, because as I've said in many videos before, guys, if legacy ever gets to a point where there is too much work involved in fixing it, it never gets fixed, ever. It stays that way, and this is especially true for CSS. So, what I want you to take away from this, guys, the secret to CSS, I'm sorry to say, in order to kind of avoid these legacy problems, is to actually know how to do it correctly. Because the problem is that the decisions that you make today may not be so, you know, if you're just in a hurry and you hack something together, that's not a problem, right? No, it might not be a problem for you, but unless you're thinking about what the hell you're doing, you're going to screw up the code base for the next person who comes in. And that snowballs, because now that person needs to add more legacy, and then the next person adds more legacy, and it goes on and on and on. So when you're writing CSS, respect it enough to do it well. Have a great day.